Asti de crise de tabarnak, asti de calice de vierge.
Asti de crise de tabarnak, asti de calice de vierge.
Asti de crise de tabarnak,
asti de calice de vierge.
Hello and welcome to Canuck is a Slur, a podcast about Canadian culture. I am Quinn, and with me today is Kelly. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for finally agreeing to host the show.
Oh, I agreed to guest the show. What kind of strings? All right, fine. Audience,
Honestly,
this is a coup of the show. We found the first C to add to the list of the Canadian culture, the Cood Canadian Culture Show. I'm glad to be here. As a Canadian, I am very interested in Canadian culture, especially with the topic that we're going to be talking about today.
and we've made great strides from when I initially messaged you and said, do you want to come on a tabletop role-playing podcast and talk about and read some weird erotica? And you were like, absolutely not. No, thank you.
In fairness, that I did not say it like that. I said it like I'm trying to get some professional space nerds to come on my podcast, and my boss listens to this. I like what you guys do, but I may not be able to put my name on it.
That's fair. Well, here you are, and why are we here today?
Well, we are here to talk about the movie. I don't know if every Canadian kid has seen this movie, but I'm willing to bet a fair chunk of the Canadian audience has. This is the movie Bon Cop, Bad Cop, the bilingual cop thriller.
Yeah, I will say right off the top that I had not seen it before now.
Really?
Yeah, so to give the audience like a peek behind the curtain, this was your idea. When I told you about the premise of the episodes I wanted to do for Canuck as a Slur, you said, oh, we should watch Bon Cop, Bad Cop.
Okay. I actually had not remembered that. I'm sorry.
I think there might have been some pints involved.
Yes,
So,
this was in London.
yeah. But I'm really glad you suggested it because thematically, I think this is the perfect movie for what we want to get into, which is just kind of get into all the little weird quirks and intricacies and fun obscura of Canadian culture. And so, I'm glad you suggested it because as soon as I watched it, I would say I was pleasantly surprised by this movie.
Yeah, especially with a lot of Canadian movies, you kind of expect them to be bad. You expect them to be very low budget. And I think this one was made pretty cheaply. They don't go all in on a lot of effects or anything. But, it's a surprisingly good movie.
Mm-hmm. 8 million was the budget. 12, almost 13 million box office is Canadian dollars.
Jeez.
Yeah.
And that's not an international release, I don't think. This is a pretty aimed at Canada kind of movie.
Well, and that box office, from what I read, I think 90% of it was from Quebec. It basically bombed in all of English Canada.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that just because there's no bilingualism outside of Quebec?
So what I had read, just kind of browsing, looking at a few websites, IMDb, was that it was marketed more as the kind of silly, goofy movie that it basically is in Quebec. And the English language marketing for it was a little more of a kind of just gritty cop film.
Okay. So they just fucked up the tone.
Yeah. And I think we'll get into kind of the tone as we go, because even me just looking at the movie poster, just kind of looking at just the actors, I was like, oh, this is going to be kind of a gritty, serious cop drama with the bilingualism as flavor.
Yeah. Which
it isn't quite that. But do you want to get into the plot summary here?
Sure, yeah.
So, so this movie, just to for the audience who hasn't seen it, and I will say if we are going to talk about the whole plot, so if you do really want to see this movie without any spoilers, pause the episode, go watch it. There's not a lot of, I would say, I don't think you would lose a lot by knowing the plot before watching it.
There's no big twists or anything.
There's not a lot of twists that make you go oh, that is so fundamental to the viewing experience. I think the best parts of it are the bilingualism. So to give people who haven't seen it an idea, the movie the dialogue is in English and in French. Characters are speaking in scenes in either language and may or may not understand each other. And there's completely just a mix, often mid-sentence, or sometimes because this is, Quebecois French, the French is full of English loanwords. So it's a beautiful potpourri of like, it's a amazing representation, I think, of the actual like language situation we have. I mean, you could probably speak to that living in Ottawa.
Yeah, although I do need to practice my French a lot better. Ottawa definitely being like Ottawa-Gatineau definitely being a city where bilingualism is very important, especially with a lot of government offices and whatnot. Like getting a lot of government jobs in Ottawa and Gatineau does rely on having at least a working knowledge of both languages.
Whereas in Alberta,
well, yeah,
what the fuck is French?
I was gonna say, like, I think I have a very skewed idea of how culturally significant this movie is. I and the people I interact with all grew up in Ottawa-Gatineau, probably the most bilingual place in Anglophone Canada. I'm sure someplace like Montreal, definitely probably more bilingual. This is a movie that in order to watch it, in order to understand it, you do very much need to be fluent in both languages. Granted, at the same time, even if you're like maybe not fluent, if you're less fluent, you're still able to follow both sides. There's never anything like they do a good job with the plot elements of kind of conveying it in both languages just in case. But like the dialogue between characters, all of that shifts pretty wildly back and forth.
So this is a super important question. Did your version that you watched have subs?
The one that I watched did not.
Really?
Well, the first time I watched it, it did not. The time I watched it this morning, it did. I was able to understand it well. Like, again, I am not perfectly fluent in French. The first time through, I was able to understand it well enough. The second time with the subtitles, it did help bring across some of the more like the snappier quotes.
Okay.
Kind of some of the more memorable lines that if I had listened to it just in French, I would have just like, oh, I understand roughly the gist of what they're saying.
That's interesting because I have definitely no better French than you. And I bought this movie off YouTube, and because I couldn't torrent it, it's not popular enough. So I gave YouTube my money, and their version has all of the French dialogue subbed in English. And from what I'd read online, I thought all versions of the movie they subbed the appropriate half of the language for like the French releases had
whatever the audience.
Subs. Yeah. So I'm surprised you saw an unsubbed version, but I will say, like, if anybody is completely monolingual, or at least just, does not speak any French, I should say, if you go at least onto the YouTube version, you will get full subtitles for the French portions, because I feel like I would have been pretty lost without them, because it's very colloquial, informal French.
Yeah, there is a good amount of kind of slang French in there. I will say, yeah, like the first version was definitely an unsubbed version. And whenever I was a kid, whenever I was in school, we did watch an unsubbed version, because this was kind of a, being able to understand either side of this movie was a good kind of like way of understanding how good you are at learning French. And as we will get to later, this movie is very good at teaching you new elements of French, something that your French teacher in high school is probably not going to teach you or test you on.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going to come a little bit later.
Yeah. And I have to say, this was a very funny meta experience for me. So I was so glad to finally be done with talking about Don Cherry and hockey culture, because I spent so many hours making like 6 hours worth of Don Cherry and hockey culture. And I'm like, great, we are going to watch a Quebecois cop film. And here's what happens. Here we go. I'm going to read my plot summary. The movie opens with some world building audio of a radio host discussing what else? Hockey. We get a small break from hockey chat to watch a man in a hockey mask violently assault another man using a hockey stick. Then it's finally back to hockey as we get a little more expository VO from a guest star that we'll come back to in a bit.
So yeah, we start off, not to kind of retread, but like we're introduced to this guy being tied up in a basement, and crucially, he is being tattooed. He's unconscious. A guy in a hockey mask is tattooing him. He wakes up. He says something like, "What did I do?" And then the guy, the killer, who we're going to be tracking through this movie, says, "That's the problem, Ben. You didn't do anything," but in French. So yeah, he kills him with a hockey stick, and then right on screen it says like, "The game is on." and then we're right into it.
Yeah, perfect.
As an intro, he's pretty effective.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do want to say, like, I watched this as a kid. This is definitely not a kid's movie. They're swearing all the fucking time. They teach people how to swear, but this is still like, this is one of the very few like actual good bilingual movies out there. So, you know, anytime, like French class, we watch this in like grade 9 all the way through grade 12. Like this is something that like the teachers just bite the bullet and say like, yeah, why not? At least they'll learn a little bit of French good.
That's wild. That was not part of our curriculum at all.
Yeah, and at least in Ontario, it was like if you're a substitute teacher and you want to distract a class for an hour because you've just been like thrown into like a French course out of nowhere, throw Bon Cop Bad Cop on, you'll be fine.
Yeah, that's, you know, it's just got to be that anti-Quebecois racism here in Alberta, because literally the reason I knew what this movie was when you told me is I went to a different movie when this came out in 2006. And I remember seeing Bon Cop, Bad Cop on the marquee, and I'm like, oh, that's some sort of like bilingual pun. Probably some kind of Canadian movie. Never thought about it, I don't think, ever again. Never heard anyone talk about it until you suggested it, from my memory. But like, in fairness, a bunch of my friends, when I was saying, oh, I'm watching this to record a podcast about it, they're like, oh, that's like a classic. And I was like, oh, sure.
Yeah, and you are right that it is a pun. So so Bon Cop is French for good cop. So it's gonna be a classic good cop, bad cop story, where we're introduced to our good cop first and then our bad cop.
Yeah, so that's exactly where we were in my summary here. So we're then introduced to Anglophone police officer Martin Ward, who also, let's talk real quick. So he's played by an actor named Cullum Fiore.
Yes.
Do you have any familiarity with him as an actor?
I have definitely, like, both of these actors, I have seen them around Canadian cinema. I haven't really read up on their careers, but I believe they have broken out into some other things. It's also just like, if you're filming Canadian shows in and around Toronto, you're going to wind up in bigger shows because Toronto is just a hub for that kind of stuff. But yeah, as for these guys specifically playing Martin and David, I was not really familiar with their work before.
Yeah, so he's in a few things. People can look at his Wikipedia on their own time. It's one of those actors I think it's quite interesting where you're like, oh, who's this person? Like, I've never seen them, but they seem competent. And it's like, oh, what does this person do? Shakespeare. He's a big Shakespeare guy, and I think he's a really good actor. I should say right up front. I think both lead actors are very strong in this movie. I think they play their characters extremely well. And a tiny bit of like a peek at what we might do in the future with this show, because one of the things that we're kind of using as a framing device, as we got into with our first episode, was that the miniseries, The Greatest Canadian. And Cullum Fiore played both Pierre Trudeau, who I believe is number I had this list memorized. He's in the top 10. And Glenn
looks like it. He could be a convincing Trudeau.
Oh yeah, he's a good Trudeau, and he played Glenn Gould in 32 short films about Glenn Gould, also in the top 100 greatest Canadians. Well, top 100 vote getters.
Man, it is one of my favorite things in acting, and I mean, my only other example I'm going to bring up, so maybe I shouldn't say it's my favorite, is the actor for Mr. Leahy.
You got any piss jugs you want to get rid of, boys?
Can you get out of here with your piss jugs?
Yeah, you're in the fucking middle of something here. Live TV? What are you talking about, Ricky?
Who was also this incredibly qualified, like, Shakespearean actor, like, went to all the best schools, you know, was entirely enriched in this, like, very professional acting. And then he's, you know, not only is he incredibly good at it, but he accepts the job to just be the liquor. And get, like, probably more famous for that than anything else. And he like never actually drank a drop of alcohol. Every Leahy scene you see is like apple juice or something.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will have to cover Trailer Park Boys someday.
Oh, so, yeah. That's like Canada's export to the world.
Mm-hmm. We are then introduced to Anglophone police officer Martin Ward and his family, in this case, his son and his sister. And I didn't get from the initial scene that it was his sister. I was kind of confused who it was, but it does get, I think, made more clear later.
Yeah. And his son, so we're immediately introduced like he's going to be the good cop because he's boring as fuck and he aspires to a desk job. So like there's this little funny play on words where his son is 15 years old, doesn't want to interact with his cringe dad at all. He says like, "Oh yeah, I was trying to be a DJ yesterday. He was DJing for a gig." And his dad's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be a DJ too, a desk jockey. It's going to rule." Which obviously does not work. And then his aunt is significantly cooler and is able to get his son to talk, and he's like mystified by this.
Yeah, you took the next words right out of mouth. Like the scene is here to make clear he is a dork. His son does not respect him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we cut to David Bouchard, the sexy, suave French cop. He's a tough guy with fresh stitches. He's preparing a little petit déjeuner for his family, in this case, his daughter and his ex-wife, who lives upstairs from him, basically.
Yeah.
Like they're kind of neighbors.
Like he has been kicked out, but he's not out of their life, it seems like. It's just they are separated and he is incredibly nearby, as in like one floor away.
Mm-hmm.
And we get the sense like they don't seem to have split on the worst terms, because his ex-wife tells him, I think the quote is she tells him like, "Hey, you know, if you were like this all the time, we would still be married." And then she says, "But like between those 10 good minutes, there's always the job, other women, the job, your pals, the job, hockey, and the job."
Hockey mentioned once again.
Yes. Excitedly pointing at the screen with a beer in my other hand. I know what that is.
Oh, so I had a point moment, which we'll get to. So despite how he's portrayed to us, Gabrielle, his daughter, bluntly informs him in the cutting way that only a teenager can, "T'es pas cool." Brutal.
You're not fucking cool. Yeah, and she's doing this because she wants to get a belly button piercing, and her parents are saying no. And she responds petulantly, just like, "You're not cool." Which actually does seem to wound him a little, because David throughout the movie cares a lot about being cool.
Yeah.
He's very much trying to be cool.
Yeah. So my next note on David, this probably just reflects how internet poisoned I am. I don't know if you picked up on this, but I wrote this in all caps. He is wearing what I would call a Liz Truss day collar.
All right, maybe I'm not that brain poisoned. Okay. Maybe I need to listen to more Trash Future. But
so
okay,
Liz Truss. So this was something that Trash Future, as you mentioned, because this is what November Kelly pointed out on Twitter. Like when Liz Truss became ascendant and became the UK Prime Minister, that she was always wearing this little ring on a chain, basically. And she was like, "That is a kink thing. That is what you like. That's, you wear like a kink collar. It's like when you want to go incognito in public, you wear this is like your little stealthy kink thing you wear in public." And I don't know why Bouchard is wearing this, but it's all I could see the whole movie. I'm like, he's wearing the Liz Truss.
Well, not to spoil things later, but that does line up with Martin's sister. So
yeah.
So yeah, his ex-wife kind of lays out the whole like, "We separated because you're so obsessed with your job," and then immediately proving her point. Like he says something like, "No, I am not obsessed with my job," and then his phone rings,
and then he's called in on sa journée off.
Yeah, so he's just like, and he is also informed as he leaves to go do his job because he has to care about his job more than his family, which destroyed his family. That his daughter has a ballet recital that he has forgotten the time of.
And foreshadowing is a narrative technique wherein, we get some corny cinematography for the drive over. To me, my immediate reaction was it looks a bit cheap. And Bouchard steps out of his little kind of hot rod with an emphatic coolness, which feels like it's being laid on a little thick. And the tension is quickly cut as he slams his door and his side mirror falls off. So I would say these are kind of like two competing or complementary energies that I think really set the tone for the rest of the movie.
It is a comedy. Like, it is trying to be funny, but there are aspirations of being like cool and action-packed at times where they're not playing it for laughs. It does kind of like, it does clash. There is definitely a good amount of like tone clash in this movie. The reason why he drives out there is that both Martin and David have a case. And that case is exactly on the border between Ontario and Quebec, or right on the sign.
And I should mention, right when he arrives on scene, this is 11 minutes in, is when we finally get our first Christa Calista Tabernac. It's quite quiet, but it is in there.
Oh, yeah. Keep a running count of those, audience. That guy that we saw get murdered right at the start, his corpse is now splayed out on top of the Ontario-Quebec border sign. So the sign is 20 feet tall, and there's just a guy kind of laying on top of it.
Yep.
So our two detectives meet. They argue for a little while, and what they're arguing for, neither of them wants the case. They don't think it's interesting. They don't want to do it. They are trying to argue for the other guy getting it. So David argues that the feet are in Ontario, and if we're using football or tennis rules, then the feet define where you are, so he's in Ontario. Martin says, his body and his head are in Quebec, and if we're doing a 100-yard dash or something, that's what defines a win. His heart is in Quebec, so he's a Quebecer, but his ass is in Ontario, so he should be yours. So even though they are arguing over who does not have to take on this case, and Martin kind of gets bored and says, all right, I'm just going to be the bigger man. I'm going to go do this. He grabs a ladder and he starts getting ready to pull the corpse down. This sets David off, who gets incredibly competitive and decides that he's going to actually get the corpse first. So they are both on either side of the border. They have these ladders up and they are trying to pull the corpse over to their side. And in doing so, they both fall off their ladders. They both grab onto the hands and legs of this corpse and they fully rip it in half. And now it is on both sides, which means that now they have to cooperate.
Yeah, that's exactly how the law works. That's exactly how corpses work too. I can confirm this as a medical professional that it's very easy to just yank a corpse in half. But I think that's also just the movie again, kind of lampshading this is campy. We're doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
Oh, also this little moment when they first introduce each other, and you get this French-speaking guy, this English-speaking guy. And, the way that the language dynamic works in Canada, generally, especially if you're in a job like this, you're going to assume that a French speaker speaks English. It's still the dominant language of the whole country. Yeah. And a lot of English speakers don't speak French. So you see Ward throw this little kind of deferential, when they meet, he says enchanté. And Bouchard jumps right on and does what any
Enchanté.
French speaker does. Yeah, is he mocks what he sees as a pitiful attempt at speaking the language.
Yeah, and then it turns out that Martin actually does speak very good French, which it's a fun point. I know I'm getting a little ahead here, but it's a fun point that first David is oh, you speak crap French. I'm going to make fun of you for that. And then Martin is actually, I studied French in Paris. And he's oh, you speak fucking prissy French, France French? Ooh, what's wrong with you? He's immediately flip-flopped of just I'm just going to keep making fun of this guy. I fucking hate him.
Yeah, and that is exactly what I noted from the next scene. They have a meeting with both of their superiors, and we also get another indication that I made a note that one of the reasons we know that Bouchard is cool is because on the scene he's smoking. One of the reasons we know that Ward is a dork is because he's now wearing a turtleneck.
Yeah.
And the very next thing I wrote was that we learned that Ward is something worse than a mere Anglophone, which is that he does speak French, but Parisian,
yeah,
worse.
He also says that he took French immersion in school, which I also took. So I'm feeling a little attacked by inference.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in this scene, we get the first example of what I think is kind of the hallmark of this movie, and that's the Franglais conversation.
Yes. They've been brought in, and both of their respective bosses. So you've got the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, and you've got the SQ, Sûreté du Québec, Quebec Safety. These respective provincial police forces, and both of their bosses are pulling them in and saying hey, we have an idea. We're going to do some cooperation. And explicitly, the only reason they want to do the cooperation is to keep the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, off their asses and to get themselves some more budget. So they just want to show that they can do this thing and work together.
Okay, I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, the fun of this scene comes from the fact that neither of the two bosses can really speak the other language. So David's boss can't really speak English good, and Martin's boss can't speak French. So they do some kind of weird semi-translation back and forth. like they somewhat translate for each other, but anytime, it's kind of funny. Anytime Martin's boss says something, the other guy translates it in French, but he does like this dramatic reading, like he's throwing his arms out. He's like, "We don't know where the murderer came from."
Yeah.
And he's not doing it to mock the other guy. He's just really getting into the role of police chief.
I love the dynamic because it's this four-way dynamic of people who have basically four distinct levels of bilingualism from basically zero to like completely.
The only reason it works in the movie is that Martin and David, the two partners, are both completely bilingual. Like they've got accents, but they fully understand both English and French. And they can, like, there are a bunch of conversations where they're not just switching back and forth, where it'll be like David speaking in English and Martin speaking in French, and they both just understand each other. Which I think is where the movie, like the gimmick of the movie really shines. Is when you can just have like anyone speaking any of these two official languages and no one bats an eye, and it isn't a bit. It's just them talking.
Yeah, like I would say, like far from, well, I mean, I guess it is a gimmick, but it is the thing that I think the movie does so well because it's like, it is so relevant to, like, this movie isn't trying to be like Canadian for the sake of being Canadian. Well, sorry, there are parts of that, but like, I think this is what is very justified in making a movie like this is that is a pretty like unique dynamic. I mean, you would have, there's lots of countries that have their levels of bilingualism, but like it to me feels like that's what I'm coming to the movie for, is this very fun interplay where these people are just pinging back and forth between these languages. And your experience as a viewer is honestly going to be a little different based on like for example, watching my version, there are subtitles for the French dialogue. If you didn't understand a lick of French, you would be getting these translations that like convey meaning, right? That aren't always literal. So you only get what the person is trying to say, but when you know a little bit of French, you can you get this subtext of like, this is what the subtitles told me, and this is what the person literally said. And sometimes they're a little bit different. And yeah, it's just, to me, it's so fun. And that part is so well done. I think it is far and away the strongest part of the movie.
Yeah. They like their bosses want them to partner up. Neither of these two guys want to partner up. And we get their level of competency within the force showed off here because David's boss is like, "Hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to fucking suspend your ass." And Martin's boss is, "Hey, if you do this, I'm not going to give you that desk job. You're going to have to like keep doing detective stuff forever." And this like completely cows both of them immediately. They're just like, "All right, fine, we're going to do this."
Yeah, it is good that like the characters not only, have the language difference, but like they do have very different energies, and they do like they make a pretty traditional fun like odd couple buddy cop duo.
Yeah.
And then you layer on the language.
Yeah. So we then get, I believe this is the right point for this, we are introduced to a new victim. Who is on the phone. He's hearing the news, because all of these guys throughout this movie, the people being targeted are like hockey officials, people within. In the movie, they never call it the NHL. They don't use team names. They give them like thinly veiled. Instead of the Montreal Canadiens, it's the Montreal Patriots. Instead of the Quebec Nordiques, it's the Quebec Fleur de Lis.
Yeah,
stuff like that. But these are all hockey officials. This guy is hearing the news about the other guy who got killed. And then he is immediately bundled into a trunk. He's grabbed and he's gone.
So yeah, because the first victim is Benoit Brisset. He's a hockey executive, and he's not as much of a direct stand-in for someone that I know of. But he's blamed for the transfer of the fake team, the Quebec Fleur de Lis, to Colorado. And what's interesting about, like you say, it's thinly veiled. They really, really map onto real life things, right? Which is like the Quebec Nordiques. They went to Colorado. That's exactly where they went. So it's kind of an interesting series of choices they've made to
tie these fictional murders to actual like points of, oh, this did happen. Someone could conceivably have reacted this way to these events.
Yeah. So the person being kidnapped then, that's Grosbu, right?
Yeah.
And then, like you said, now we're down in the morgue, which is I described it as a linguistically frenetic scene. And we meet Jeff, the coroner, who I said, he looks sort of like a Quebecois Aaron Paul, but he talks sort of like a Quebecois Charlie Day.
Yeah, he's just meant to be the wacky scientist character. He talks mile a minute. It's kind of funny because like throughout this whole scene, Martin is continuously being thrown off by how this guy talks. But then whenever they leave, David is also just like, yeah, I speak perfect French and I also don't understand a fucking thing he said.
Yeah.
This guy like does the brain math perfectly and figures out like, oh, the only way he could have gotten up there is from a helicopter. That is the optimal way. And I know exactly what helicopter company did this. And like, he's the fucking coroner. There is one dumb little fun bit where like they're listing off all of these like, all right, well, does he have this? Does he have that? David asks in French, like, is he circumcised? And then Martin just like lifts up the sheet and just goes, yep. He just drops it right back down. We move on. Yeah, Jeff's fucking insane. He comes up later, but he tells them to look for a helicopter company. So they go off, they get in the car, and I really like this. We get a couple of these in the movie. There is no rush, but we get unnecessary David driving really dangerously montages over cool music.
Yes.
He just randomly drives off the road and starts like driving through a packed park and almost running people over. There is, again, no rush. He is just very bad at driving.
Yeah, it's shot like it's a chase. He's driving like it's a chase. There is no chase.
Yeah.
Literally just driving.
Yeah, so they start laying out ground rules because if they're going to work together, Martin needs to get this guy under control. And his first one's kind of fun. It's like no smoking. David respond like, "Hey, that's your right," and then immediately lights up a cigarette. Yeah. And when Martin asks him like, "Yo, what the fuck are you doing?" He's like, "Well, I have rights too."
Yeah, moi aussi j'ai les droits. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, sorry. When we introduced Martin Ward, we talked about Colm Feore, and with David Bouchard, he's played by an actor named Patrick Huard, which. To me, every time I read his last name, I'm like, oh, this is like, that sounds like what what the Quebecois Al Pacino would say, you know? Hooah! And are you familiar with his career much?
Not really. I haven't read into a lot of the people in this movie.
Yeah, so he, I think, was a pretty big deal in Quebec, and he's also one of the co-writers of this movie.
Really? I have definitely seen him around.
He was a big driving force into making it. I think it was like his idea, and he just got people to help him write it, and he cast himself in it. So he was in a TV show called, it's a film series called Les Boys, or Les Boys. I don't know how you would francisize that, which is about what else? Like a ragtag hockey team.
Also, I think he does a very good job with it. I think he plays it very convincingly, but if you're going to make yourself a self-insert in the movie that you wrote, of course it's going to be the fucking bad boy loose cannon cop who is so cool, gets to have sex with all the women. Like, I don't like, again, he pulls it off well. Yeah. Or maybe he pulled it off because he like desperately wanted, I don't know.
Again, I think these two actors just play their roles really well. I think they're very well cast, and it is kind of funny, like he cast himself, but yeah, I pretty much as soon as he's in the movie, I'm like, yeah, I just believe him as this kind of like sexy tough guy. Like, he's wearing a tank top in the first scene, and you're like, dang, man, yeah. Yeah.
And then we're immediately introduced to Martin like 2 scenes later with this like ridiculous turtleneck, and it's just kind of like, yeah, that tracks. But from Jeff, they figure out it's a helicopter company. They do their dangerous driving montage. From the helicopter company, they get their next lead, and this is a guy named Luc Terrien. He's been a pilot, a helicopter pilot for 10 years. David, he makes a note of it. It's a one-off line, but they don't really come back to it. David probably arrested him 10 years ago for cocaine possession or something. Mm-hmm. He's just like, yo, I recognize that name. I probably arrested him.
And I believe he is presented as like he was a peripheral kind of like bubble guy hockey player, right? Like kind of semi-pro.
Yeah, and this does get into his motivation a little later, is that he could have made it into the NHL, but someone prevented him. I believe it was also the first victim.
Yeah.
They find him, they go to this bar, they find Luc, and they're doing this back and forth that I really like, where Martin is like, no, I'm going to take charge. This is my rodeo. I'm going to be the only one asking questions. You just hang out in the corner. So he starts talking to him.
There's another good bit here where you mentioned where they established the rules ahead of time, right?
Yeah.
And exactly what you said, which is that Martin says, like, I'm in charge of like talking to people, and like semi-seriously, Bouchard says, I'm in charge of fights.
Yeah, he had something
Driving,
else. Yeah.
fights and driving, I think it is.
Okay. Yeah, so Martin goes to interrogate Luke, and Luke just immediately starts beating the shit out of him. Martin can hold his own pretty well, but after like 30 seconds of fighting, he's asking David for help, and then I like this because they don't fight Luke together. David comes in and starts helping, and then Martin immediately just starts chatting to the bartender.
Mm-hmm.
They take turns not helping each other fight Luke, and so they both get pretty beaten up by this guy by the time they like take him down.
Yeah, and there's a technique. There's sort of like a filmmaking technique that they lean on a lot, which kind of borders on gimmicky, but they do a lot of mirroring of things, right? So like one of them gets in a fight, needs help, the other bails them out. They switch positions. One starts losing his edge in the fight, needs help, and like there's a lot of times that the two characters or two different things are really like very clearly played off each other like that.
But they do manage to capture Luke, and this is the most famous part of the movie. If anyone is familiar with this movie, this is what they will have seen. And if you have not, I highly recommend you can go and look up Bon Cop, Bad Cop swearing lesson. Or you like this scene is famous enough, you can just look up French swearing lesson and you will find this scene.
Yeah. Honestly, I'll cut in the scene and people can see it, or people can hear it.
Oh, nasty calice de pourrissal!
Surveille ton langage.
Qu'est-ce qu'il a dit?
Qu'on est des pourrissals.
I got that part. Hostie de calice.
It's swearing. Hostie de pourri, c'est pourri pas mal. Mais calice de pourri, ça commence à être vraiment pourri. Mais c'est pas si pire que ça, parce qu'il y a déjà quelqu'un qui m'a traité de hostie de pourri de calice de tabarnak.
Over the top pourri.
Ouais.
Attends un peu que je sorte d'ici, tu vas trouver ça moins drôle.
J'ai pas fini. Tu peux le conjuguer aussi.
Oh, you mean like a verb?
Moi, t'en calisser une, là.
Ah, c'est beau, Luc. C'est un bel exemple, ça. Moi, t'en calisser une. Oh! Tu peux le faire au masculin aussi. Ah, mais je vais t'en crisser un.
Got it.
Toi, mon tabarnak, là.
Ah, merci. Tu vois, j'allais l'oublier, celui-là. Tu peux l'utiliser comme un nom. Il a raison. Comme, je vais t'en donner un tabarnak. C'est un nom propre. Ah, c'est vrai, on a des expressions aussi. Comme, je m'en calisse.
OK, enough. Tu veux pas qu'il porte plainte?
Je m'en calisse.
Like it feels so natural, and it's so fun because it's such like I love just specificities of any culture. Like all of them have them. I just love to have those little things that evolve organically. That's so, because like this kind of French swearing does not exist in France. This is a Quebecois thing.
Yeah.
And it's not a new set of words. It's literally like these are Catholic words. They're church words, right? They're kind of minced oaths. Yeah.
Yeah. So calice is chalice, like what you drink, like a religious cup. Tabarnak is tabernacle. Like a lot of Quebec swear words are just drawn from like religious iconography. Although the like it does make a good point, this scene of basically saying, oh no, like tabernacle is just fuck. Like they just kind of line up. Like you can use it the same way a tabarnak is a fuck. You can use it as a verb, you can use it as an adjective. And this is the kind of thing where like after this was the most educational part of this movie to a bunch of kids in a French class. Because again, we were not being taught this in school. And like after class, this is something that everybody would be leaving that class talking like, yo, we know how to swear now. This is awesome. And like, not only do we know how to swear, but like we have been taught the proper uses. We've been like this movie, this scene gives like 5 or 6 good examples of ways to use this. I love it.
It made you the person you are today.
Exactly. Martin says, I just hope you don't speak that way around kids, which immediately reminds David that he has forgotten about his daughter's ballet recital. And we get another David driving irresponsibly while loud music plays montage of him rushing to get to this recital, crucially, he leaves the car in a handicap spot, and he leaves Luke locked up in the trunk.
Mm-hmm.
I actually really like this scene because, like, David is presented all the time as being so, cool and collected and whatnot. And he goes in and he's watching Gabrielle's ballet recital. And we see that it's cute. He has fully familiarized himself with ballet in order to support his daughter. And as he has memorized every single step, like he could probably do this same dance just as well as she can, because as she is doing this, he's kind of like whisper shouting advice to her the whole time, and he's like doing the movements to kind of guide. He's like one step ahead of her doing the movements to guide her. Not that she actually seems to need it, but like he desperately wants to be involved and like support his daughter, which I think is interesting. It's going to play in later, but it's a nice little bit of like characterization of this guy is like, he's so into the job that he let his family fall apart, but he's also like, he's still fully obsessed with supporting his daughter any way he can.
Yeah, like it's entirely there to just flesh out this person and humanize them a little bit.
Yeah.
Which is, it's a nice scene. It's a cute scene.
He's fully doing like the proud dad thing. Like he leans over and he just like taps someone's shoulder behind him and he's just like, yo, that's my daughter in the front row right there.
And plot-wise, it does advance a little bit because they've been gone for a while. They come back out to the car, and it's being towed. And then car blows up.
Yeah, so they like flag down the tow truck, stop police, all that stuff. It works. And then as soon as Martin says like, see, stop police works in every single language. It's perfect. And then a car bomb goes off and destroys the car and presumably kills Luke.
And there is another bit of mirroring that happens. This is jumping ahead, but whatever. They're currently in Quebec here, and Martin is chasing after this car, yelling, "Stop police" in English. And we do get a bit later where they are, I think it is when they're in Toronto. So they are in Ontario, and David Bouchard is chasing after someone yelling like "arrête," or he's yelling in French.
Yeah.
In the English place, and you get another little like fun bit of mirroring there where they're yelling their own language in the other jurisdiction.
So like once this car has exploded and presumably killed their suspect, they get into a fight because Martin is like, hey, I need to call this in. David says that is insane. They're both going to get fired for this. And they fight for a little while and they come to the conclusion, like Martin is convinced around to like, all right, we have 24 hours to find something to continue this investigation or else this is all going to be for nothing. And he like, whenever he finally comes around to this, and this is the first time that we see him kind of stepping one little toe out of the rules, his regulations, he like explodes. He says, what does he say? He says, "Shit de merde de shit de tabarnak."
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because like, the way he swears is, it's kind of like an English language version of the Quebecois cursing. Because the other, I think, hallmark of the Quebecois cursing is the way you stack and chain them, right? It's like Christ de calice de tabarnak.
Fuck of shit of ass. Yeah, like it doesn't translate to English, but I do like it.
Yeah.
Like that each of these words, regardless of their context, can be also just used as a multiplier for the other word.
Shit de merde, shit de fuck de tabarnak!
And I do like, I'm just realizing it now that I'm looking at my notes, but I do like that he adds the de in between in French. So it's shit de merde de shit de tabarnak. So like,
okay, yeah, he does do that. Yeah.
So it's not just that he's swearing, instead of swearing in English with a couple of little French words thrown in, he is swearing in French with some English thrown in.
Mm-hmm.
So they've decided to kind of go against the regulations, and they have a new lead. And I think it's they're going to Luke's house.
But the very next thing that happens is where they go straight to Bouchard for dinner.
Oh yes, yeah, you're right.
And you get this kind of establishing scene where Martin is kind of, it looks, I would say, pretty like, it's made quite obvious that he's having a very cutesy for sure interaction with Susie, Bouchard's ex-wife, because of course they're all having dinner together again, and it does kind of open up this little thing of like, ooh, like is there a little like chemistry between these two that like adds these stressors to the dynamic of like, ooh, hey, me and your ex-wife, we're enjoying each other's company here.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of an odd thing that I think kind of contrasted with the way that, you know, Bouchard like treats his daughter, but I guess it is in line with like, oh, like, I hope you don't curse in front of your daughter, where he's just kind of talking about fucking in front of his daughter.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting character development. Oh, there are cats doing zoomies around me.
My God.
See, of course, when I'm trying to set up the computer, when we're trying to get recording, I have a cat absolutely manhandling me and being adorable in the camera. We start recording and they're gone, not on camera.
Tragic.
Yeah. So they have the dinner. It's just another kind of character scene. We get a little bit more insight into both characters' failed marriages. So it's kind of made crystal clear, if you didn't realize it, like, oh, they're both separated. And then I kind of had a draft joke that maybe we can punch up, but it was something along the lines of like, hey, there's more divorced cops here than a Tesla meetup. I don't know if that's anything. Maybe we can punch that up.
Yeah, I think it works. I think it works. But like, they need to get into this house, and crucially, because they have not reported anything, because no one even knows that Luke is a suspect, David has to break in without a warrant. And the way he excuses this is he just says, yeah, I think I saw someone in distress in there. And then he just smashes the window and crawls through.
Mm-hmm. All the while giving us a little Je m'en calisse smash.
Je m'en calisse, which we learned in the French swearing lesson just means I don't give a shit.
Mm-hmm. And that's an aspect of the French swearing that I hadn't known. That was another thing you told me about in London. And like, after watching this movie, I'm really enamored with it. I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to start saying that. Like,
yeah.
Je m'en calisse.
Je m'en calisse. I don't, it's not even, I don't even give a chalice. It's, I don't chalice.
Yeah.
It admittedly sounds a lot better in the French. So they start looking around this house and, there is a kind of funny bit. So right away showing like, you know, Martin is too much of a stickler for regulations. David is just straight up like playing with evidence. Whenever Martin comes in, David jumps around the corner wearing the killer's mask. That like still has blood on it. He's just like, yo, look at this shit. I'm getting my fingerprints all in it.
Mm-hmm.
So they explore a little bit. This like, they don't know it, but this is the exact same scene that we saw in the first shot where this guy was murdered. This is the killer's hideout, and the walls are covered in hockey memorabilia.
Mm-hmm.
The teams aren't like, a lot of it is NHL stuff or this movie's version of NHL stuff. But like we talked about with Luke, a lot of it is kind of junior hockey stuff, like AHL, OHL level stuff. So as they're looking through this, they find,
we've kind of found that the villain has done basically the worst two crimes imaginable. One, murder, and two, growing cannabis.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why the cannabis was there other than like, I mean, well, Luke, we have established like cocaine possession. This is 2006, so weed is still like, 10 years away from being legal.
Yeah, that feels very of its time, where like these cannabis plants are kind of, it feels to me like they're trying to be presented as like, oh, this is salacious, this is crime.
But then at the same time, it is played for laughs like a couple of scenes later. So it's not totally like, whoa, this is awful.
Yeah.
Like we kind of learned. So Luke has been screwed out of joining the NHL. He was on the road to being a big hockey player. And that has kind of ruined his life. And we also find a lot of their equivalent of the Quebec Nordiques, the Quebec Fleur de Lis or Quebec City Fleur de Lis. So we can kind of infer from this, and they've been sold to Colorado, and we can kind of infer from this that Luke is pissed about teams being sent to the States, as well as him not being able to join the NHL.
Yeah, which in 2006 was a much more like, I think, fresh wound for Canadians, because like it had been a decade and change since the teams from Winnipeg and Quebec City moved to the U.S. This is 5 years before Winnipeg gets the team from Atlanta moved back to Winnipeg. Yeah. So like since then, like at that time, I think it felt much more real that like, what if we lose more teams?
We were losing teams. Yeah.
And just this character that is like they're dead. He's dead when they find him, right?
Do you mean the victim or
the victim? Yeah.
Yeah. So they find a corpse while David is downstairs looking at this grow op that Luke has. Martin goes upstairs and he finds a new victim. And this victim, like audience, keep a running tally of these as well. So the first guy, he had a tattoo on him that was a fleur de lis, which is a symbol of Quebec and this Quebec Nordiques knockoff team. And it had a scales, like he was being judged. And this guy they find, the guy who was abducted a couple of scenes ago, he has a big I love Colorado tattooed across his forehead.
Yeah, because there's both of these characters factor into this moving of the fictional team from Quebec to Colorado. And that is so this, like, I think that, like, Benoit Brisset, I think it was the one they find hanging over the sign. It didn't feel like he had a real life analog exactly, but this character, which is Michel, they pronounce it Grobu. It's spelled with 2 S's where I saw it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Michel Grobu is very, very much a like one-to-one here. He's a stand-in for Marcel Aubu, who was the Nordiques owner. And we did talk about that a little bit in our Don Cherry episodes of how he was very much like relevant in the progression of this team and how it ended up moving and how we ended up later beyond becoming a sex pest. So we will do an episode on him at some point, but this is like a very, so I don't feel bad that this character dies.
Yeah. And meanwhile, like as Martin is discovering this corpse, David is downstairs and he activates a fucking laser tripwire as he's exploring this greenhouse. There is a laser tripwire here. And it locks the door behind him. It's some Saw level shit, and it lights the entire greenhouse on fire. Like a firebomb immediately goes off. Mm-hmm. And this also starts filling the entire house with weed smoke and just actual normal smoke.
Mm-hmm.
So Martin is upstairs. He starts trying to get the corpse out of the building because it's their evidence. And David has to like Metal Gear Solid himself out of danger by hiding under a bathtub and crawling around.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a great scene. I like that they don't give it a lot of payoff. It's not something later, but David has to get to so he's on the far side of the room where the door has closed and it's got an electronic lock. He has to crawl under the bathtub all the way to the door, put his gun or the barrel of it through the hole in the bathtub and then shoot out the lock. And he's firing in a tiny little enclosed bathtub, this gun, and it looks like it like kills his ears, which I did like.
I love that. And I think it's a great example here of kind of, as we talked about before, the kind of competing energies of this movie, where as soon as the fire's there and he looks at the bathtub, I go, oh, he's going to use the bathtub to protect himself from the fire, which, I mean, I'm not a firefighter. It feels a bit like it's very movie magic, right?
Like if all he had to do was just shoot the door, it probably would have been easier to just run across and shoot the door really quick. But cause it does give us some comedy because he bumps into things a little bit. He's swearing the entire time, so we get some more of that.
Well, this speaks to my taste as a viewer a little bit, where like obviously we don't have to be sticklers for realism from movies, and the the suspension of disbelief is like it's fun. It's fun to watch him, like you say, Metal Gear Solid his way through it. But I love when realism is employed in a way that's very thoughtful and fun. And so that's kind of what I mean about the competing tensions, where I'm like, okay, he puts himself in this bathtub. Everything is just very, very Hollywood magic, or Canadian Hollywood magic. And I was expecting, as he draws his gun, I'm like, obviously they're not going to, this is just going to be also played in a cartoon way where he just shoots it through the hole. Like when in reality, you would have a horrible time. And I was very pleasantly surprised when he just like screams in pain because he has shot off a gun next to his head with no ear protection in a metal thing. And I'm like, I love that energy. I love when someone really thinks about it and like, it doesn't have to be a bummer to do something realistically. It's very funny how real that feels, where he just like absolutely regrets his choices in doing that. And I'm like, I love
just
that
wish
energy.
they had paid it off through the rest of the movie. I wish he had like something like blood coming out of one ear or something, or he was a little, or he did a "I can't hear you" joke later or something like that.
Yeah. And I wonder what you kind of thought of this, but my feeling was by the time we got to the end of the movie had, I think, a couple of promising threads that didn't really pay off or have things come back to them. And that was one of them. Like there was an opportunity to come back and like, there was just so much going on. It can't all pay off, but we didn't get a lot of like closure on some of these little doors that the movie opened.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, every movie is going to have that. Like there's going to be plot threads left behind.
Mm-hmm.
as David escapes, Martin is dying of smoke inhalation, and he's like collapsed on the stairs. So David gets him out, but before he can go back and recover the corpse, the evidence, the entire house just detonates. And then they start laughing because they're high, because they've just been stuck in a weed fire. And this lasts them long enough. They drive back to the SQ, the Sûreté du Québec, David's boss. And they have to explain the whole situation of like why Luc died in a car bomb, why they burnt down the house, why they don't have any evidence anymore. And they're high, they're giggling the entire time. That's the entire, one thing I do like about weed being legal, like these old movies, they have the whole like weed is bad kind of angle, but I also love that weed being normalized and legal now just means that I don't have to deal with as much of like, yo, wouldn't it be funny if for 3 minutes we just saw a guy be kind of giggly? Wouldn't that just be the craziest joke?
Yeah, it also feels a bit of its time of like these people are high for exactly in the right way to sell kind of a low-hanging fruit joke and exactly long enough for it to work in the plot.
Yeah, and I do like the line though that Martin delivers. So like in very halting French, like his entire ability to speak French leaves him as soon as he gets high.
Yes,
Martin
is very
says,
realistic. I have had this happen to me in real life.
I'll have to give it a try. I don't think I've spoken French high. Today would be the day for it, though. We are recording on 420.
That is true.
So he says that, like he tells David's boss, like, don't blame him, don't suspend him. This is my fault. I thought I saw someone in there in distress, and he was in distress, just not today. Yeah. Which I love that line. I do love that line.
Yeah, I mean, what is more distressing than being dead? Like, not wrong.
Well, and he's saying like, well, he was probably in distress before he died, so same difference. This does not work. The entire cooperation program is shut down. Both guys are sent back to their respective jobs. They aren't fired, which I guess is good, considering how like the whole point of them hiding things was that they thought they were going to get like completely fired. We are introduced to a new victim in Ontario that Martin is investigating.
And very conveniently, like it's interesting how they have a scene where it feels like this is sort of like the Dark Knight of the Soul thing. It's like, oh, they have been separated from each other. They're off the case. This is the worst moment. Like, how are we going to get these characters back in the same room? And then the very next
30
scene,
seconds.
Bouchard walks on his crime scene. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that feels like a bit of a missed opportunity, but
yeah. And this is where we also get the return of Cut Rate Don Cherry, played by we don't see him yet, but his voice is very clearly Canadian comedian Rick Mercer.
Yes, number 50 greatest Canadian Rick Mercer.
Yeah, who like at that time, I don't think he's as big anymore. I don't think he's still doing stuff, but he was the guy behind the Talking to American stuff. He was the guy behind the Rick Mercer Report. He was very big as a Canadian comedy figure at this time. And he's playing Don Cherry, and his character is complaining about all of these teams moving down south. And this was very much a fear at the time that like, hey, Winnipeg, Quebec, all these teams are moving. They're going to keep going. Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, they're all going to move. And he says the line, like, I hate Montreal. I hate the team. I hate the people. I hate the city. What is the point of hating Montreal if they're in Houston?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, we'll jump ahead a little bit where, since you mentioned Houston, the character that comes in later in the movie, who is sort of this like cowboy Texan owner of this team of like where they're threatening to relocate the team from Montreal to.
Yeah.
His last name is Arbusto, which is Spanish for bush. And he uses the term misunderestimate, which was like a famous Bushism, which again, like 2006, that's like right in the zeitgeist of making fun of George Bush. How quickly we forget.
And whenever he comes to the making fun of names, we're actually, so I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The crime that Martin is investigating and that David goes to reunite with him with is a new victim. And she is a woman who has a skate, like an ice hockey skate, fully driven into the back of her head.
Mm-hmm.
And she is Martina Flabcheeks, which Which one thing about this movie is that all of the made up names just tend to be like big ass, because gros but is written, it's like, you know, if you take your Franglish, it's big butt. And then we meet our Bettman, our Gary Bettman stand-in later, and he's Harry Buttman. And now we have Martina Flab Cheeks. Yeah. It is very got him energy.
And it is, I think, a real particular example of, again, that clash of, you have these moments where things are kind of gritty and pseudo-realistic, and then these people, and like this Shakespearean as actor is delivering these lines, and they're playing really well off each other, and they're like very seriously calling someone flab cheeks. It's a, it is, again, the tone is all over the place.
Yeah, and again, like, this movie does not shy away from the blood and gore, especially near the end. Like this, they do a good job of showing this corpse with a skate driven through her head,
which is very hard to do.
Yeah, and we learn that she also has a tattoo. She has a Philly tattoo with the LA removed. So her thing, I believe, is that she, I can't remember exactly what player it was, but she drove an important. Sorry?
Well, it is the Eric Lindros stand-in.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because they say he is number 88. So this is, again, what I find very odd is they will go right up to the edge of real stuff. They when they talk about I think he's the next victim, they call Pickleton. He's a stand-in for Peter Pocklington, the guy who sold Gretzky to LA and nearly was the reason the Oilers would have moved, because like they were also in danger of getting sold out of town in that era. But again, they refer to this character as like the greatest player ever. Sorry, this is not the 88. This is the Pocklington thing, where they say, "Oh, he sold the great one," and they like show it as number 99. Like they go all the way around describing this like Wayne Gretzky figure. And interestingly, for these players, they don't even give a fake name. They just have no name.
Yeah. And we also learn through this that every tattoo on these victims has two elements. So one element is the crime that they have been killed for, and the other is a clue to the next victim. For example, the first tattoo had a Quebec fleur-de-lis, and it had a scale. So that guy was getting judged for what he did to Luc. And then the fleur-de-lis pointed to the next guy who sold them to Colorado. And that guy had an I Love Colorado tattoo that had 88 on it, which points us to this victim. And she has a Philly tattoo, a Philadelphia tattoo, but crucially, the L and the A are removed, which points us to LA.
Yeah. And Gretzky was sold to LA, and Lindros was traded to Philadelphia. Yeah. So like these things are matching up. And it's interesting the parts that don't match up, because they say that this number 88 character, he went to Philadelphia, that's all true, that the team that he was traded from was the Quebec team, the one that moved. All of that is fully lining up with reality. And then they say that Martina Flabcheeks was the first female player agent. And that part isn't true, because
So is Martina Flabcheeks based on a real person?
I don't think so, because what was influential in Lindros's choice to refuse to play in Quebec was his parents. His parents stood in front of him and advocated for him and all that. And like, we will do an episode on, honestly, like when I'm probably gonna do one collective thing for Marcel Aubu and the Lindros trade, because it's all very connected and very, very interesting. And like, yeah, there's so much going on there.
So it is kind of funny then that even with a fully made up character, they still gave her a funny, make fun of big ass name.
Yeah, like I could be wrong, but I don't think it's a reference to anything.
Gotcha. So this gives us our next victim, because the LA, they're able to figure out that this is, it's pointing them towards a guy called Pickleman. And he is set to go on the Don Cherry, the Not Don Cherry show with Rick Mercer.
Yeah, Tom Barry.
Martin and David make their way there. Pickleman has not shown up for some strange reason. And as he's getting more and more mad, Tom Barry starts like talking about the tattoo killer and like giving him advice of like, hey, yeah, here's some more, because he's so mad about teams going to the US. He like puts out an open call to the tattoo killer is what he brands this guy as. He gives him a cool nickname and he's like, yo, here are some other people you should kill. David and Martin are really not happy about this.
Yeah.
And
this character is very interesting in that, so Tom Barry is very obviously like word-wise a play on Don Cherry. And the synchronicities are quite interesting because one of the kind of peak moments that people like quite enjoyed from the Don Cherry content was when Don Cherry goes on Rick Mercer's show to go suit shopping. And that was actually after this movie. That was after Rick Mercer had played this Don Cherry spoof in the movie. And one of the things that is not one-to-one here is instead of Don Cherry's very outlandish suits, he's wearing a normal suit, but he wears very weird ties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that does get referenced because this guy does not have a guest, he needs to like his director just says like, all right, we need anyone to be a guest. So David and Martin, the two cops who are just happen to be standing in the room, are like fully conscripted to be his guests. And he starts grilling them about like, hey, what are you going to do about this killer who's killing all these people I hate? And they have to, it's like David has to kind of awkwardly say it in English. And then of course, Tom Barry makes fun of him for that. And that starts a fight. David threatens to throttle him with his ties.
Yeah.
And then as this is going on, the killer calls in.
Right.
He's saying, I'm trying to save hockey. He basically delivers his manifesto as Rick Mercer, David, and Martin are like fully in a fist fight over whether or not to keep him on the line because ratings or close him off.
Yeah. And it's this part where he gives his manifesto. I don't know how you felt about this, but it felt a bit underwhelming because it didn't, like, we finally get to understand a little more about this killer, and that part just felt very tacked on. Like, he's just kind of a collection of tropes about hockey. I didn't really like feel the villain that much. I wasn't compelled by the villain. And maybe this is a bit of the consequence of, again, these things felt more real in 2006. And it kind of felt like the game was degrading here. And like, since then, I think things have changed. Maybe that's why it landed flat with me.
Yeah, especially whenever we've been introduced to this guy, Luc Terrien, who's like, he has been personally screwed out of being in the NHL and now he's a drug dealer and a helicopter pilot. Like that is a solid villain, like why he's doing what he's doing. And the killer who, like, he's talking through a vocoder, so they can't really hear who he is.
Mm-hmm.
But we hear, like, the audience, we get to hear inside of where he's calling from. He has a very different voice from Luke. And we find out that he's just a big fan of hockey, and he's just like a guy who is already sadistic and sociopathic, except his fixation is keeping hockey Canadian. And he views it, we get hints here and there, he views it as this like hyper nationalistic, like, what is Canada without hockey? And hockey is being polluted by other people playing it.
Yeah.
Also, something that does get noted, it doesn't get brought up again, is that the killer is also bilingual. He goes back and forth, and he has a really weird accent in both languages. Like his English and his French both sound like, you can listen to it, they both sound really stilted and weird, and I cannot place them.
So I grabbed a few trivia pieces off IMDb. So I'm going to read straight from their trivia here.
Sure thing.
In the English audio commentary, the director-producer make light of the different accents in the movie. They point out that the tattoo killer has an accent speaking both English and French, and they wrote him as Franco-Manitoban.
Okay, that explains that.
Right, but it wouldn't give you his like unplaceable accent in English. I can't like discern the French enough to say anything either way, but I think they kind of maybe wrote him a certain way and then didn't know what to do with it and got there. So I think he just talks weird without really like, I think the
like
accent
he doesn't necessarily like pronounce things differently. He kind of just has a weird cadence to his talking.
Yeah.
He kind of like pauses in weird ways, which could also like, that's in movies, that's a hallmark of every serial killer. They all have to talk in weird ways. You know, you put a menacing gap in between words for some reason. So yeah, in between this whole fight, David is able to hang up, like he rips the cord out of the phone and he shouts. I thought this would have been a great setup to a line, to a good joke, because David shouts into the camera on live TV, like, hey, if you want to talk to me, here is my number. And And throughout the whole movie, like every woman character that David meets tries to get his number. Like everyone is very into David. And he repeatedly just like gives them like, oh yeah, I'll give you my number. It's 9, 1, and 1. There you go. So I thought for sure they were going to set up like 5 minutes of him picking up his phone and it's just various people who are into him.
That would be good, yeah.
But then, you know, the killer immediately calls him back and is just like, yo, what the fuck? I was delivering my manifesto on TV.
And he can't get through because everyone else is blowing up his phone?
Yeah.
So do you know the trivia for this scene, this moment?
No, I do not.
This is really good. So again, from IMDb. When Bouchard is on Tom Barry's show and gives out his phone number for the tattoo killer, his lip movement seems different from what he actually says. According to the DVD commentaries, in the take, Patrick Huard actually gave his personal cell phone number. The fake number was dubbed over it.
Which also makes sense because like the fake number they give has like in 10 numbers, it has like 9 fives. It's like 555, 555, 5595.
So I did rewatch this moment several times because I didn't think the lip reading was that off, but it cuts away from his face when he says 555 because that's the universal fake number, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I think what they did was they kept in so what he gives is the real Quebec area, the real Montreal area code, which I think is 514. So he gives the real area code, and that looks like this is what he says, cuts away, you have 555 dubbed, cuts back, and he gives 4 numbers that
the rest of his number, yeah.
It again looks like, to me, like it does match his lip movement. So I think they literally only swapped out the middle 3 numbers from the phone number.
Yeah.
Which is, yeah, that's funny.
This part is kind of, so the guy, Pickleman, has not shown up, and they think it's because he's been abducted. And from the killer, they are able to figure out that he is, like, they investigate the place, what is it? No, this isn't, sorry, I'm getting the various scenes where people get thrown into or pulled out of trunks mixed up.
Well, did you find this part a little hard to parse plot-wise? Because I was re-watching a few moments to clarify my plot summary. And last night I watched this like transition of scenes several times, and I had a hard time following how they get to the logical leap of finding the kidnappers in the body in the building. And I only just remember now because you mentioned it. The reason any of this is happening in this building is that Pickleton was supposed to be on Tom Barry's show. He's supposed to be in the building.
Yeah, but he has been intercepted on the way. He's been intercepted in the parking garage in the basement.
Yeah. And
the killer has captured this guy, tattooed him, and has tied him to a Zamboni. The only lead they get is like, David asks the killer, like, what are you going to do with him? And the killer's like, I'm going to put him on ice, if you know what I'm saying. And from that, they decide, all right, we got to go investigate the Zamboni.
Mm-hmm.
So they interrupt before he can kill this guy. Crucially,
do they? I thought he also died.
No, he's alive. They're able to save, or is he?
So
I could have sworn they save Buttman. You're right. This is where the movie is kind of starting to like, the other victims have had time to kind of breathe. This is kind of just like, all right, one and done, back to back. Yeah, you're right. So the pickle guy is dead. They're able to catch him.
So here, I watched this scene like 5 times, so I can tell you blow by blow what happens. Is they're in the hallway, they're saying, is he even still in the building? And they walk through the parking garage, and I mean, you can imagine a parking garage for like a major, because they're basically at like the Toronto Arena, they're the stand-in for the Air Canada Centre, or whatever it's called now. And it is like the first car you see them walk across is people screaming in the trunk. Like it's a really convenient delivered plot device. It's obviously the killer's car. It has tattoo guns in it. And they pop the trunk. There's 2 people tied up in the trunk, one of whom says nothing, and one of whom says he's a Zamboni driver. And that is what leads them to the Zamboni. It doesn't really connect that much with the put him on ice. Like they needed the guy to say I'm the Zamboni driver. So then they go to the Zamboni. You can see the guy in the Toronto Loyalist jersey with the mask on, tying this very limp looking body to the Zamboni. And the cops show up and Ward says, I'll, go attend to this victim here and check on him. And you chase our perpetrator. So Ward runs up sees the guy on the ground, like I think checks his pulse or something, and calls for help. And then never is that revisited, as far as I know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's intentionally ambiguous. Like that's perfectly valid, I guess.
And it's, yeah. So as this is going on, like as Martin is checking up on this victim, and we see it a little later, but he has a tattoo that is a 99 in a big apple. So 99 obviously referring to him, Wayne Gretzky, and then the big apple represents New York. But as this is going on, David sets off after the killer because they have caught him before he can actually like grind this guy under a Zamboni, or presumably drive him out onto the ice, dragged behind a Zamboni.
Yeah.
So the killer is also trying to like do more public spectacles, because this is just immediately before a hockey game with like tens of thousands of people in attendance. So they chase after him. David tries to shoot him a whole bunch. He makes off on one of those like little tricycle kind of scooter things, those industrial ones, until David shoots out the tires and the killer immediately hops into right next to it, another golf cart. They've run around the arena. The killer is still wearing his hockey mask and in a hockey jersey, so he just blends in really good. He ambushes David and like kind of knocks him out. Like he swings his hockey mask into his face from around a corner.
Mm-hmm.
And then in doing so, David has lost this guy. And another kind of the tone whiplash. Whenever they meet back up, Martin is just like, fine, you want to come to my place for dinner. And we get the kind of opposite scene where David is being really friendly to Martin's sister, and where Martin's son just thinks that David is the coolest guy in the world.
Yep. We have a cat just hinting at the camera. There you go.
Oh,
Get your
no.
face in there. Oh, here you come on. Hey, look. Oh, there's his face. Hi, Toshi.
Maybe I should do video content more, because I feel like then I'd have more of an incentive to shove my cat. Like my cat would be my content.
Yeah, I mean, this is the real star right here. Don't
Yeah.
get your butthole out of the way. There you go. This is good.
Very clingy cat.
This is a winner, yeah. So if you're listening on audio only, you are really missing out right now.
A cat. If you heard that that microphone bump a second ago, that was a cat.
Yeah.
I'm actually amazed he did not bump the microphone doing that, though. He fully cleared it.
Yeah, he's very athletic.
Yeah, so the killer has made it away. They are at Martin's house. David immediately sleeps with Martin's sister, and this is where kind of the kink stuff comes back, because Martin's sister is seems to be into some BDSM stuff, and David is teaching her little bits of French, and as they're having sex, gets her to scream "Vive la Québec libre," long live free Quebec, the kind of like the nationalist kind of cry.
Yeah, I fell into an internet hole about this last night, and I really, that's a very fun moment. I think that was one of the moments where like my roommate and I think her partner was here, were just kind of like walked in like, oh, you're watching this, and like that's what starts happening is this woman comes while screaming "Vive le Québec libre," which like it makes sense in context.
It is also the only point in the movie where anything about Quebec nationalism comes in. Like that is the only throwaway line there. It is not addressed anywhere else, which like I get, like, to me, I find refreshing, but I imagine to other people, especially like a lot of people in Quebec would be a little like, how can you analyze, regardless of for or against, like, how can you analyze the Canadian culture and the interplay of different provinces without looking, like specifically Quebec and Ontario, without looking at the Quebec sovereignty movement?
Mm-hmm.
Which, like, then again, it's not really, like, this movie seems to firmly have its eyes set on bilingualism and hockey, so maybe it doesn't necessarily need to tackle the rest.
I mean, Quebec sovereignty isn't very funny, I might, like, concede that.
No, but at the same time, it's also, and I imagine the jokes there would piss people off a lot more on either side, because it is more of a charged topic.
It does feel like they're trying to do some playing it safe, which is like, well, this is why we're going to appeal to like the hockey fan in all of us, because like this is the thing that is, you know, where they're still trying to do marketing. They still want to like sell it to all of Canada. And
I can laugh because it does, like, it's still, like, Martin's sister does not seem to know French, so David, like, she might not know what she's saying, because David starts her off, like, as they're having sex, just, like, teaching her, like, fucking, like, nursery rhymes and shit, and, like, gradually, word by word, builds up to, like, Vive la Québec libre.
Yeah. And the phrase that he's teaching her, I can't remember, it's like something, it's like someone and someone vont à l'école or something, and it is, like, a specific reference to, I believe, a, like, children's book that's basically like the French Canadian equivalent of like the see spot run spot run.
Yeah, yeah. But as this is going on, because they both kind of have a similar arrangement where Martin's sister also just lives like right above Martin's house. They are like immediate, like they are right there.
I didn't notice that was in both situations. That's interesting.
Or maybe not like right above, but like side by side. Like Martin is able to get over there, like walking really quick if he needs to.
Okay, you're probably right.
As this is going on, like that's what David is occupied with. A killer has broken into Martin's house. He's wearing a different hockey mask now. It's got this cool kind of like cross, like eye slit and then a big line down the middle kind of thing. He's got a silenced pistol and he's trying to kill Martin and David. So Martin notices that the window has been broken. He starts kind of hunting around. He catches the killer. They fight for a little while. It turns out it's Luc, who has come back to kill him, who did not die in the car bombing.
Yeah, that's how we learn that he's alive.
What is Martin's son's name?
I think it's Jonathan.
Oh yeah, it is Jonathan, because Martin does say that a whole lot. Jonathan, like, flying tackles Luc. You know, like he's a 15-year-old kid. It's really funny. And Luc is also massive compared to any of the actors. Like the guy playing Luc Terrien, like he looks like he could be a hockey enforcer. This kid like jumps on him and is like trying to distract him, but he's also like, at one point he gets his fingers like not into his eyes, but like almost right into his eyes and is like scrabbling at him. It's good fight choreography for this kid and this massive dude. It's
another part I think the movie does really well, which is, and I say this as somebody who I find that like most sex scenes in movies are like very often just like poorly done, very weird, very unnecessary and gratuitous. What they do here is they like sync up the fighting and the fucking really well. Like they mirror each other exactly. They transition to each other. Like I feel like it's very good cinematography and editing here, and it's like I kind of like believe that like why these characters are going at it. They have a reason to do it, which is to distract Bouchard while Ward is getting attacked.
Yeah,
it sells it really well for laughs as well. Like it didn't feel like a stupid use of it, and you're like, oh okay, like this is actually like quite clever what they're doing.
Yeah, so Luc throws Jonathan off and he's about to kill him. And then Martin comes in, he smashes the gun out of his hand and he's like beating him with like it looks like a cane. Luc runs away. He fully escapes. Martin, like fearing for David and his sister's life, he brings Jonathan upstairs. He's immediately greeted at the door by David. Like this is not like the sex scene that we see is fairly conventional. Like it's just them having sex. And then whenever they go upstairs, David is at the door with, he's wearing cat ears and he has frilly manacles on both hands. And he's just like, oh, it's your brother.
Yeah. And then, of course, like Iris has all of her clothes back on, like a whole complicated outfit back on.
Yeah.
Because everyone has to be covered up after, which is like, and it's not like they were going for like, well, it has to be PG. We have to cover everything. Like,
no,
you know,
they're swearing, there's blood, there's gore everywhere. Like,
yeah. And like, I mean, her breasts are out, like in the sex scene, like they didn't make any attempt to like, they weren't being like super coy, but then after the scene, they're like fully dressed in elaborate outfits, which is an interesting, like,
I think the kind of inference is that like after they've just had normal sex, she's just kind of like, all right, well, I'm going to do some other fun stuff now.
Maybe.
I do like this scene that like, I feel like another movie would have really dwelled on this and like destroyed their friendship and partnership again over like, you slept with my sister. But Martin, for like all of his pragmatism, does kind of seem to kind of like, well, yeah, she can have sex with whoever she likes. They do kind of tease each other a little bit, but it's not, again, like a worse movie, I feel like would have had them like, yo, what the fuck are you doing?
But that's exactly how Bouchard was when he felt like, because they have the scene where right after the initial dinner, Ward is complimenting Susie, Bouchard's ex-wife, and he is mad. He's very protective of his ex-wife, even though nothing on screen happens, nothing is shown. Like, there's nothing to say they actually hooked up or that they do later. And then he actually hooks up with Ward's sister.
Yeah.
And Ward is like, all right, whatever.
Which I guess would be like, because Martin, I imagine, like, hooking up for him means like, oh, they're going to start like dating and maybe get married or something.
Matching turtlenecks.
David is established as just having sex with a lot of women, which is part of why his original marriage fell apart. And it is, we missed that scene before. It is kind of funny that the way that Martin diffuses that of David getting all mad because he's like, you know, like, oh, you're trying to hit on my ex-wife, is Martin just says like, you know, oh, like Gabrielle, like that was incredible. And, you know, her ballet recital, she's really smart. And David instantly just switches to just like, oh my God, yeah, my daughter is so cool. I love her so much. Thank you so much he's just immediately like a Labrador, just like, oh, but she's the best.
That's funny. I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, I love the little characterization thing of like how fully obsessed he is with like supporting his daughter, that he's basically taught himself ballet just in order to like, and again, he's annoying her more than anything throughout the entire movie. He's trying to be so supportive that she just hates him for it.
Yeah.
Luc has failed to kill them. And then at the same time, we know that the killer is not operating alone. So Luc would, like, in the time that they were inside the ballet recital, Luc would not have been able to get himself out, put someone else's corpse in, and then escape. And we find out Jeff comes back into the movie. Jeff veers back in, and the victim is Rita Beaumont, who is the bartender. So the bartender that they originally met when they first met Luc, she tried to help Martin. She was able to call him once, and then from that point on, I think there were a couple of missed calls, and then she stopped calling. And she was kind of an informant. And she is the person who has been killed and put in the trunk whenever the car bomb went off.
Yeah.
So, like, whoever these killers are, Luc and this other person, they have found her, they have killed her, they are eliminating informants. So Luc has been sent to attack Martin's family, and the killer, the other guy that we've talked to, he has kidnapped Gabrielle, David's daughter.
Yeah.
This is another part where the movie kind of like falls apart because all the plans are all over the place. He threatens to kill her I believe, unless they just leave. You know, unless they just stay out of it. Don't get in my way and your daughter will be okay.
Yeah, because they haven't been able to interfere or get in his way yet.
Yeah.
Like, what is, I didn't really write down, like, how does Bouchard handle this call, like, where he's talking to him? Like, he basically threatens to come after him anyway, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He fully threatens to come after him. And to their credit, there is no point in this conversation where they're actually considering like, well, we're not going to. They're fully just like, all right, we're going to fucking go after this guy. David has to explain the situation to his ex-wife and basically promise like, I'm going to get Gabrielle back. He immediately gets a new car. He has a guy who just drops him off a car.
I really enjoyed the scene where, because Bouchard calls Susie on the phone. That's how she finds out that Gabrielle's missing. And then they end up, after the phone call with the killer, they go over and Martin stays outside. And Bouchard and Susie, or David and Susie, have this really like emotional in-person scene together. And I actually kind of I felt like this was actually one of the parts of the movie that is different from what I would say is a bit conventional. Like, because there's a lot of tropey stuff in this movie, but this part feels like it actually handles a bit different, where I think a lot of the times characters like this would have this like really articulate scene where they like lash out all of their emotions have been building up and their tensions, their conflicts, and like you get these big line deliveries or something. But instead it's like it's a mess. It's awkward. It's awkward to watch, but I'm like, that feels, again, real. And I like the realism here of like, these people are terrified. Their daughter's been kidnapped. They're not articulate at all. They are panicking and they're screaming at each other and they're just like crying and a mess. And I really thought that was a good scene.
I agree completely. I think a worse movie would have had it end with like Susie telling him like, you find the person who did this and you make them pay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like this is fully like they are both crying by the end of this. They alternately hate each other and are hugging. It's like,
Yeah, they're ugly crying.
this is people who are, fully dealing with this. Like they have so much history between each other and so much built up frustration. And now they have been pushed into a massive crisis.
Yeah.
So we know that the next victim, so the last tattoo clues us in on the next victim, and that victim is Harry Buttman, who is a thinly veiled stand-in for Gary Bettman, the head of the NHL.
They even put in like a very short actor, which is like a cheap shot, but
Yeah, so this actor, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he's 4'7" because he has brittle bone disease.
really?
And they pick him, because he is like very short. And whenever we're first introduced to him, he is making a deal with the Texan guy, and he's like, all right, as soon as I sign on this dotted line, we are going to move the team down to Texas, down to Houston. And he's about to give a press conference, and like once he does that, he's going to give a press conference. And at that press conference announcing this change, he is going to be shot and killed by an assassin.
Mm-hmm.
And then Martin and David, for his protection, they preemptively kidnap him and bundle him into a bag. And they also get some lines in because, like, throughout all of this, especially David is like, I don't like that they're sending teams down to the States. He's very much on board with like, oh, all of these different victims are jerks and I don't like them. But he's still not a sociopathic serial killer. So they kind of tell him what for. And as this is going on, Luke, who is still around, who is working with the killer, is dressing up in a Montreal Patriots beaver costume, like as their mascot. I really love this scene.
Yeah, furry Travis Bickle, right?
Yeah, and he puts on the beaver costume, and then he looks at the mirror because he's in a bathroom, and you can see in the mirror that the actual mascot has been like knocked out or killed behind him. And he's got a silence pistol, and he like looks at the mirror, and he's like, "You talking to me? You talking to me?" He fully does the "Are you talking to me?" Like he turns, he looks, he does the arm thing like 5 times, like giggling to himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he also does this. I had to look this up. This is like one of the references that you would only get if you were in Quebec. Is there's a line of pharmacies called Family Prix.
Là! Family Prix.
And he does the ad thing. He does the aha thing from the ad.
Are you talking to me? Me?
And then he goes back to doing the "Are you talking to me?" line.
He is the actor, right? Like you caught that?
Oh, I didn't actually catch that. I did not know that he was actually the actor.
He's the actor for these ads, and you can watch these Family Prix ads on YouTube, and like they're very baffling. He just goes like, "Aha, Family Prix!" It's just, like that. It's weird. It's very 90s.
The ad is meant to be that like he's in a situation where people get hurt. And whenever someone either gets hurt or is about to get hurt, he's like, aha, Family Prix, like we could have helped with this, like, or now you can come and get a painkiller. I did not know that he's the actual actor. That makes it significantly better.
Yeah, I had to double check that, but I believe that's true.
Because Buttman cannot make it to the press conference, Martin gets up on stage and he kind of says, like, he says into the microphone, like, all right, that's it, show's over, nothing's happening, crisis has been averted, everyone go home. And he walks off, which triggers Luke for some reason to want to, I guess, like finish the job. He was previously sent to kill this guy and he failed.
Mm-hmm.
We get this kind of fun scene of Luke trying to walk downstairs while wearing this mascot costume. And he makes it about halfway down a flight with these like huge overgrown like flipper feet kind of things. Before he just goes back, he uses the elevator. And whenever he comes out of the elevator, we get a great buddy cop on either side, and then 2 fists right down the middle as it like hits the camera, and they have incapacitated Luke.
Yeah, and you get a nice little moment where the killer is, because his plan has gone awry, he can't, like there's no Buttman there to kill. He tries to call Luke, like his asset, and like, I guess get him out of there or get him to improvise. And he's like, his phone is ringing and he can't access it because it's inside the mascot costume.
Yeah.
But I love this, like, this is a part where they really go for the goofs that I think really works, is just the entire, like, fight scene with the mascot. Was it a Steven Seagal or a Van Damme movie where somebody fights the Pittsburgh Penguins mascot?
I'm not certain.
But yeah, I just love to watch someone beat up a mascot. It's always funny.
So now basically the plan is, and crucially, they throw Luke in the exact same trunk that they have Buttman in. They are just like the guy who was going to assassinate Buttman and Buttman are now in the same trunk together and just left there. Like they're not tied up or anything. They are just in the trunk together.
And he's fully in the mascot suit.
Yeah, he's still in the mascot suit.
I think he takes the head off, but stuffs him on top of Buttman in the mascot suit in the trunk.
And their plan now is to exchange. So they call the killer and they say, hey, we're going to exchange Gabrielle for Buttman. And the killer kind of complains. He's like, this was not the plan, but fine, I'll do it. You better not try and fuck with me or Gabrielle dies. So what do? They try to fuck with him.
I'm not sure what Bouchard's plan was because he agrees to those terms. He boards the killer's boat. He's on like a boat in a harbor.
Yeah.
And he's got a gun to Terry Ames back, I believe still in the mascot costume.
Yes.
And he's got this mascot as hostage, is like, I think because he kind of believes that Terrien is important to him.
Yeah.
Like somehow on the same level.
Yeah, he wants to, instead of exchanging Buttman for Gabrielle, he wants to exchange Terrien for Gabrielle. He's like, hey, you can get your henchman back. And the killer says, like, you should have offered me something worthwhile. And immediately just starts like shooting at Luke and David.
Yeah, he's like, I don't like this guy. He's a loser I found on the internet, and he shoots him dead. And I was like, that's fun. Yeah, like that was a bad plan, dude.
And we also get to see the killer, and the killer is just kind of like a nerdy looking, like he does not look like a good villain, which I almost think is better. Like he just looks like a guy in his 20s. He looks like someone who could be way too into hockey.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. The trouble I had with the villain is like, am I supposed to see the villain as like sympathetic or a joke or just evil, or like how was I supposed to respond to the villain?
I think, and like the way he's kind of played, like half of it is that he's kind of demented and, he doesn't seem healthy. He seems like way too obsessed with this. But then at the same time, now that we meet him, he kind of becomes like more I am evil villain because he starts delivering monologues and he starts like, it stops being about hockey and it starts being about the cops. And he's like, he starts delivering info on their lives, like, oh, you're not a good cop, like, oh, you really should have stayed in Montreal, stuff like that. I don't know why he didn't just shoot David, because David because as soon as the killer starts shooting Luke, David is standing behind him. David just kind of dives to the side and is like lying on the ground, and he still has a gun on this guy. And the guy moves his gun back to point at Gabrielle. I don't know why he didn't just shoot David, who is completely unprotected.
Yeah, because David has plot armor. Like it's the pace, the beats of this scene did feel a bit like clunky.
Yeah, like they had to get to the next scene somehow.
Because what happens next is Martin Ward comes in. He does have Buttman as his captive, which like I don't know. Like maybe you could have also just both walked in like that.
Also, Gabrielle has a bomb on her now. That hasn't really been established.
Yeah. So the villain activates the time bomb, and because that bomb is going to go off and like probably kill them all, the villain here, that tattoo killer, he still has all the bargaining chips. He has the daughter who they really care about. Bouchard certainly really cares about, and they have Buttman who like, well, he's trying to kill him anyway. Like he would probably want to blow them all up because he believes he's on a righteous journey to kill these evil people.
And Buttman would kind of be the pinnacle of that. Like he is the head of the NHL.
So he first gets Bouchard to put his gun down by having the gun to Gabrielle. Then he gets Ward to put his gun down. And so now he really has all the chips. And so Ward just makes a move, which is just basically kind of like bum rush him, and immediately gets shot. But he is wearing a ballistic vest, which like, him as the procedural cop makes sense.
Yeah. It does still hit and disable his arm, though. For the rest of the movie, his left arm is just kind of useless at his side.
Right, yeah, he's got some blood on him. And so the killer just bounces.
Takes Buttman with him.
Right, yeah, he grabs Buttman in the ensuing fray, runs off because he's like, now I have the victim that I wanted.
Don't know why I guess he wanted to do his serial killer thing as opposed to just shooting Buttman.
Right. Right, 100%.
But yeah, the killer becomes very stupid in the last 5 minutes, basically, is what we're saying.
Yeah, well, he hasn't tattooed him yet, or he hasn't been able to tattoo Butman.
Yeah.
So Bouchard runs to his daughter to free her. Ward is down. He gets up just in time to say, hey, wait, this bomb is booby-trapped. And again, being the smart guy here, he's able to do, a classic bomb defusal scene. You pull the right wires at the right time.
Yeah.
And the bomb is not, or at least it deactivates the booby trap, not the bomb.
But we also find out in him disarming the bomb, or telling David how to disarm the bomb, because he needs 2 hands. Martin has been disabled. We find out that he was in the bomb squad before Jonathan was born. So like this boring procedural cop, we find out that he used to be cool. And that he changed jobs because he had a kid and he was like, I do not want to get blown up.
Okay, that is another thing that I didn't quite catch. So that does like flesh it out a little bit.
So it does kind of, I like that idea that it depicts him wanting to have a desk job, which is boring, but he kind of wants to be doing all of his stuff for his kid, especially whenever he is in a job. Like, he gets shot multiple times. He gets almost killed in this movie several times. That like him wanting a job that will not get him killed and means that he can continue being he is the single provider for his son. Like, we don't see him, we don't see the ex-wife or anything if she's still around.
Yeah, because she ran off to England.
Oh, yeah.
Because she eloped with like a, what was it, like a semi-prince or something that they call him?
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm remembering that now.
Yeah, he gets like cucked by the royal family, basically.
Yeah, so he used to be kind of like Bouchard, and then he learned responsibility because he had to provide for his kid.
Yeah, he's got that like growth arc.
Yeah.
You get a nice little trade-off here. So Ward, Martin Ward, is the one who stays with Gabrielle, and Gabrielle is like not saying like, Dad, come to me. She's saying, go get that guy. She's the one who gets to say like, go fuck up that villain. So Bouchard leaves Gabrielle with Ward and then runs off, does a cool chase scene. He like sprints up and jumps on the car that the villain is driving. Bouchard is thrown off, the car flips, and the villain crawls out of the wreckage and gets into a fight with Bouchard.
Yes. And despite this guy just looking like he looks like me. He's a doughy 20-something. Well, yeah, so he throws him off the car. Yeah, Bouchard gets shot in the process of this. So that's his initial advantage. I mean, we see some sadism. He's able to like take Bouchard fucking apart. He leans him up against some like oil barrels and like punches him so his head rebounds against them.
Mm-hmm.
For what little fight choreography this 2006 Canadian crime bilingual drama thingy has, a lot of it goes into this guy being brutal. He's also become stupid at this point. So he's delivering his whole like, he hates David personally. This is no longer about hockey. He's about to kill him. And then Martin tackles him. They fight for a little bit, and then the villain runs away.
Yeah, and he just surreptitiously slipped the bomb into the villain's pocket. So I believe Bouchard gets up to gun him down, and Ward is he
just says like, no, like, don't worry. Good things come to those who wait.
Yeah.
And I like that they didn't do the explosion right there. Like, there's fully 30 seconds of watching this guy run down this pier. And it even gets to the point where both Martin and David at different points are just like, man, I hope that bomb's working. Otherwise, he's going to get away. They're just like, no, it's probably going to work. I think I said it for a minute. I'm not too sure. And then, again, like, this is not a kid's movie, despite the fact that, like, a lot of Canadian kids watch this movie through school. We get a gory explosion when this thing goes off. Like, the killer, he hears the beep beep that every bomb does 10 seconds before it goes off by law.
Obviously, yeah, you have to.
Otherwise, they wouldn't know that they had a bomb on them.
Well, that is the law everywhere in Canada except for Quebec. It's always a Quebec exception.
Yeah. Every character that dies that we see die on screen, they all die. Like Luc, who does not speak English very good. He speaks French mostly. He's the guy who teaches us initially about French swearing. Whenever he dies, he just gets a kind of like muffled, he just kind of grunts like, fuck. This guy, whenever he has the bomb on them, he doesn't panic or anything. He just goes like, You got to be fucking kidding me.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
roasted by his own petard. And then we get a gory explosion. We get a bunch of shots of a very gory explosion. There's like red goop and like little shreds of flesh raining down everywhere. I watched this in 9th grade and I like possibly even in elementary school.
Yeah.
And then they leave, and then they leave Buttman in the trunk. They just walk off, and
Beautiful
hard
moment,
credits. Yeah. Although in a post-credit scene, we do see Buttman saying he goes back to another press conference, and he's like, "I was never going to send the Montreal Patriots down to Houston. Don't worry. Why would anyone even think that? I love Canada."
Yeah. And this is another kind of like accidental callback for people who have watched the Don Cherry episodes where Buttman says, "I know how much you people love hockey."
Yeah.
And that's a nice moment where Martin Ward is telling him like good things come to those who wait, because earlier in the movie, he told him to wait when, you know, they need the warrant, and Bouchard's kind of move fast and break things gets them into trouble, right? It burns the house down. You know, he doesn't heed his warnings. And then on this scene, he listens to Ward, and you get that like, wait, like really wait for the payoff. And then you get the payoff. And it's kind of like, it's a nice little like, you know, cherry on that little ice cream.
One thing I like back and forth in this movie is anytime, like at first someone will be complaining. This is what gets us into the French swearing lesson is there like David is trying to bundle Luke into the trunk of his car, and Martin says like, "No, you can't do this. There are regulations." He's going to sit in the back. Like he says, "I don't know if you hate rules because you're arrogant, you're disrespectful, or just because you're French." But then Luke spits in Martin's face. And Martin is immediately just like, "Yeah, fucking have at him, beat him up." And he says, "C'est ta juridiction." It's your jurisdiction. And there's a bunch of back and forth scenes where they're both kind of like, they are complaining and then something happens. And then they're both just like, "Do the thing you were going to do. It's your jurisdiction." Like, I don't care anymore.
Yeah, je m'en calisse.
I think they still remain the straight-laced guy and the wild guy by the end of it. But by the end of the movie, like any good buddy cop movie, there's a little bit of overlap. They've learned to get comfortable with each other's antics a little bit.
Yeah, like there's some formula, but it does like it acknowledges it's following the buddy cop formula, and it does, I think, a generally like admirable job of it. Like you are watching a popcorn movie. It is fun to watch, and I think it like ultimately does succeed in that. It's like, yeah, like this is fun to watch. It's also when you talk about that little like those little tinges of like, you know, you could call it anti-French xenophobia, where like, I don't know if you disrespect rules just because you're French. You get a little moment as Bouchard is chasing the what we now know is Terrien down in the arena and is unsuccessful at chasing him down. He's running through this crowd of people because they're in like the Toronto arena, and that's part of why the villain is able to, why Terrien is able to blend in easily, is like he's in the Toronto arena wearing the Toronto jersey. You see all these extras and random people wearing the jersey. So he's just like pushing through this crowd trying to find the guy, and someone off camera shouts like, "You Frenchies run like you drive." So there's a few moments of that.
And I don't know if things were different in 2006, but like even I do not think anyone would do that in Canada, like just randomly shout anti-French or anti-Anglo stuff at each other like out of nowhere. Especially because he just like the thing that clues him in that he's a Frenchie, as he calls him, is just I think he just says like "stop it."
Yeah, that's the part. Yeah,
I think that kind of covers it.
Yeah, so that's the end of the plot there. There was something that I was like is kind of a through line of the movie, and this is kind of getting into Bechdel cast areas, which is very appropriate because I didn't mention this at the beginning, but you're being part of a landmark moment for this show, because in all of the like recordings and live streams and stuff we've done over the past like almost 3 years now, this is the first time there has been no female or non-binary identifying people on the show.
My God.
So congratulations, we did it.
We have de-diversified this podcast.
That's right. It is finally a podcast just for les boys.
Yes, les white Canadian boys.
And this is the perfect time to talk about the way women are portrayed
which is kind of non-exist. Like now that I'm thinking about it, the most like female, I feel like almost the best female representation you get is the third victim, because she is called out as being the first woman agent in the NHL.
Mm-hmm. 0 lines of dialogue.
Yeah, which puts her within league. Like, she is capable enough as a woman, as a businesswoman, to be in league with these other guys who deserve to be murdered.
Yeah.
Which beyond that, they're not presented that well. David sleeps with a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, so this movie does not pass the Bechdel test. No 2 named female characters talk to each other. Not even close.
No.
If you're not familiar, the Bechdel test is 2 women, or some people expand it to like 2 people of a marginalized gender, have to speak at least 2 lines of dialogue to each other and not about a man.
Oh, okay.
So I think the closest you get Sylvie and Gabrielle talking to each other, but it's all in this context of talking about Bouchard.
Yeah.
Every female character who speaks has some sort of interaction with a male character that is portrayed as flirtatious.
Yes.
You know, in Iris's case, she has sex with Bouchard. In Susie's case, she's kind of made to be, like, certainly Bouchard sees it as flirting with Martin Ward. And then the first character we see outside of them is, I don't think she gets a name. She's a woman at the helicopter company.
She tries to get David's number.
She tries to get David's number. He's the one where he says, my number is 911. And I think it is like relevant. I think the movie intentionally, like the, movies tend to be filled with conventionally attractive people, and that's who they cast as like the ex-wife and the sister. This is a more average looking lady. I think the movie really does that on purpose, because when she hits on David, this guy who wants to fuck everyone, he dismisses her.
Yeah.
Right. He says, call 911, ask for Martin Ward. So like, she's kind of like clowned on in that way a bit.
Yeah. It's like her attraction is viewed as like, oh, this can be a prank on someone else, on this guy I don't like yet.
Yeah. And then the next one we get is Rita, the bartender.
Yeah.
Who, they always call the barmaid. As soon as she sees Martin Ward walk in, she starts like unzipping her top and like she's adjusting her cleavage. And then she's very flirty with him. She's making all the jokes about like knowing all these yoga positions. And I think that's basically it. I think you basically have those like 4 speaking female characters. The other one would be, actually, I think who does not get flirted with is Tom Barry's exasperated producer. I think she actually gets to be a character.
By which, like, her being a character is her being hassled and harassed by Tom Barry, because she's, admittedly, this might not be as much of a man-woman thing. Like, this is the domineering host and the long-suffering production staff kind of thing.
Yeah, because Tom Barry,
as he's depicted, is like, he runs that show with an iron fist.
And a fun irony, he's being played by openly gay comedian Rick Mercer. And when his male assistant is doing his makeup, he gets a shout, somebody get this fruit away from me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he is equally mean to everyone. You know, he's discriminatory towards women, towards gay people, and the French, because another kind of Don Cherry reference is the butchering of names. Even though, like, Bouchard is a pretty easy name to say, it's hard to butcher, so they have to really work to get him to mess up the name Bouchard.
Oh yeah, how does he say it? I'm blanking on that right now.
From Ontario, Detective Martin Ward, and from Montreal, David Bouchard, Boucherville, one of these French names I always screw up. Men, are you any closer to getting this jerk?
Yeah, like, so he gets it right the first time. He says, like, David Bouchard, like, clearly just trying to get under his skin.
They could have picked a harder name for Bouchard.
Yeah.
So I have a few things in terms of the trivia, if you're down to run through them quickly.
Sure thing.
So in October 2006, this movie ended Porky's 24-year reign as the highest grossing Canadian movie at the Canadian box office.
Damn it.
I've heard of Porky's. I did not know it was like a Canadian movie. Maybe that'll have to go on the list. Have you seen it?
I actually have not.
And then in turn, its own reign was later ended by Resident Evil Afterlife, which I didn't realize was a domestic production. Never seen it. Probably not going to.
Yeah.
And, oh yeah, so here's the stuff about the box office. Although the movie was a huge box office hit in French Canada, the movie was a huge box office failure almost everywhere in English Canada. In Vancouver, Canada's third largest city, the movie made less than, I want you to guess the number, less than this number during its opening weekend. In all of Vancouver.
Less than 10,000.
Less than $500.
Jesus. I wonder how many theaters it was in.
I mean, obviously there's no like citations on the IMDb trivia page, but.
Wow.
So yeah, that's where it says the marketing materials were like portrayed the movie more as a dark thriller than the lighthearted comedy it actually was.
Okay.
Maybe this is a good jumping off point for the summary. Like, how did you feel about the movie overall? I would, if I'm going first, I would say I kind of wish it was a little more of the, not like a dark thriller, but a black comedy, right? You have the comedic scenes. I love like the trunk swearing scene. I love all these bilingual scenes. This is just subjective, but what I could have done with less of is the part where it feels like they have to lay on so thick. Like, of course, this movie is about hockey. Of course, we have to constantly like, you know, really lay on the Canadian stuff thick. Where my gut feeling is between the writing team or maybe like the studio execs, it really gives me the energy of somebody was not confident enough to say like, let's let the movie be good on its own merits. We have to market it as this like extremely Canadian movie. We have to pander to hockey fans.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I kind of want a just a solid thriller or like a solid popcorn movie about these bilingual cops who are just solving like a case.
Yeah.
Even if it, like, I think a really fun thing, because like one thing that does happen in this movie is like the people keep getting killed. They fail to prevent a lot of the crime. They keep fucking up. They could have taken a very like Coen Brothers angle and had like the actual killer and their plot be so inconsequential. I think that could have been fun. They kind of get close to it when he's trying to deliver his manifesto and the cops are ignoring him because they're fighting with Tom Barry.
I do definitely agree that there could have been more kind of dark comedy, because a lot of the dark stuff, I feel like this movie is more of a comedy with dark elements because they very rarely mix up the dark stuff with the comedy. One of the few examples I can think of is kind of fucking around with the corpse at the start whenever it gets split in half over the sign. But otherwise, a lot of the deaths, like the other victims, all of those depictions are kind of tonal whiplash from, you know, nothing funny happens with the second victim, third victim, fourth victim, arguably Buttman. It's jokes and it's comedy until something dark happens, and then we're into dark, serious stuff, and then it's back to jokes and comedy, where I feel like, yeah, like you said, they could have blended it a little better together. I think they set a pretty good tone for that at first, but it didn't get there. And especially with the last 10 to 15 minutes or so, things happen very quickly, and like the audience heard in us trying to describe it, it gets a little harder to follow. Things happen, you know, the other victims, the other crimes are given a lot more time to breathe. And that, I think, lends itself a lot better to the movie.
Yeah, the plot does feel like it lurches sometimes. Like we just get railroad from thing to thing. Like, you know, it's just very convenient the way all these things that we talked about happened, where Bouchard just shows up at Ward's crime scene right away. After he's sent back to Toronto, like they just stumble upon the trunk full of people, like, and that, like, those are ultimately, I think, really, really minor, you know, minor nitpicks. Like at the end of the day, that's not the biggest thing. But there's something you said right at the beginning, which was when you hear a Canadian movie, you kind of just think, oh, like it's kind of going to be bad.
Some like CBC TV show or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I mean, I felt that way about CBC TV shows, and I was very surprised when people are like, oh, Schitt's Creek is really good. And I was like, oh, wow. Which I haven't seen it, but there's, I think, and this is not unique to Canada. I think that in places that like, because we all have this, we exist in this like American media hegemony, everything is from Hollywood. It tends to feel like when you are from a different country and you have domestic productions, it feels like this is just sort of like a pandery thing just for us.
It's like a quaint little...
Yeah, and it's going to be quaint. And so like, I think the mark of a really good movie that is not produced in Hollywood is like, well, does it stand on its own merits? In this case, would I as a Canadian show this to a person from a total third party country, and would they like it? And my gut feeling is that if I showed this to somebody from like, I don't know, Ireland or whatever, and I said like, here, watch this movie, I think that they would experience those kind of like bilingual scenes. That interplay is like, this is really quirky and interesting. and see the hockey stuff as just something going like very over their head, and also just that a lot of that like cartoonish Canadianness and those other elements, especially the hockey memorabilia all over the killer's wall, like that would feel kind of corny. I'd feel more embarrassed to show that to like a neutral party, if that makes sense.
Like I do feel like it's definitely like what is something that a Canadian serial killer would kill over? Oh, hockey. You know, like this would be like making I mean the direct comparison would be what if we made this exact same movie but for Americans and the guy was killing because of baseball. Like it would feel probably pretty weird.
Baseball like isn't necessarily the American thing when you talk like when people talk in third person about Americans, you know, like the American thing is like burger these days, right? Can Americans understand burger? But like hockey is really strongly associated with Canadians, which is why I'm like, I would love to see someone try to do a good Canadian movie that didn't involve hockey.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you say, like this, we're presented with this killer whose manifesto is entirely about hockey lore. And I just still, I said this before, but like, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to feel about it. Like, am I supposed to be really like, oh, his cause is kind of righteous, or like, oh no, he is laughable?
Yeah. Like there had been many, many more American NHL teams than Canadian NHL teams even by that time. You know, like even if Americans are half as interested as Canadians, it's still 10 times the population, so 5 times the number of American hockey fans. Like however you do the math.
Honestly, like part of it is, again, we're watching a 2006 movie in 2024, and this is not the movie's fault, but I think if I put myself in 2006 mode, yeah, you can read the villain as being petty for killing people over, you know, these really minor beefs like trading a player to the United States.
Yeah.
I think it just, especially having just covered these two things in our Don Cherry episodes, where we really briefly mentioned Marcel Lebeau, who like it only came out like in like 2015 that he was like this serial sexual harasser of all his staff. Like
right.
His actual, I think, crimes are much worse than the ones he's accused of in the movie of moving a team. Like, yeah, he's a dick for doing that, but like he really sucks for molesting people. But that's coming now later. But I'm just like, yeah, like, wow, actually fuck that guy. Like someone should hurt him. And then the same with Bettman, where like, yeah, you can blame him for teams moving. You can blame him for all these things wrong with the sport. All that is very petty. But the thing, to me personally, having just spent so many hours on this, that doesn't feel petty is how shitty Gary Bettman, who is still in charge of the NHL, is about head trauma. And I'm like, you should be in fucking jail. Like you are a terrorist, Gary Bettman. So yeah, it's weird to have these victims that I also now really hate.
Yeah. With all of these victims, except for Buttman, we get either one tiny scene where they get a couple of lines and then they're gone, or we get no establishing things of them. Like,
yeah, Martina Flabcheeks.
Martina Flabcheeks. She does not appear alive in the movie. The first 2 victims, they appear for like very quick establishing scenes and then they get killed. The pickle guy also does not appear alive in the entire movie. So like, yeah, having some reason to understand why these people are bad. The only like lore coming out of these characters comes from Martin and David or the killer.
Yeah. I think I would love to hear the opinion later of people who do not have, like people who are not Canadian or people who have zero knowledge of the hockey lore. How did they feel about like the villain? Because like the more I think about it, as you say, like these characters, the victims, we generally don't get to see them. We don't get very much like showing compared to telling about their crimes or like the things that made them the targets.
Yeah.
Really the reason you understand, like I understand as a viewer why this man would want to murder this character Grobu, because I know the real life lore. I know what the references are and I get why the killer's going for them. I feel like if you were not at all familiar with the lore, it would land really hollow because you're just being told the killer hated this person, that's why they died.
In his manifesto, he actually delivers a lot of like nationalistic claims. Like he claims that, you know, that he is doing this to protect Canada, to protect hockey, that any teams moving to America, foreigners playing the game, these are all listed as things that he views as polluting the game. So to him, to someone with that kind of drive, and then the sadism and sociopathy of someone who can turn that into both murders and like calling cards.
Yeah, I think it's a lot like you mentioned about the Quebec sovereignty, the Canadian nationalism, a thing that kind of comes up like in one particular scene and then otherwise is left aside because it's almost too hot of a topic.
Yeah.
It could be more compelling to have this really like nationalistic killer if that was examined more, but it's just not examined.
Yeah, and part of that might just be time constraints, or the movie taking however many like topics as it can physically handle. Like you cannot make one movie that covers all of Franco-Anglo Canadian relations and history and culture and whatnot. But to see it thrown in and then not done anything with is kind of disappointing.
I think this is a good segue to you said maybe you can't cover all that in one movie, but I presume you know this. They didn't just make one movie.
No, I have not seen the new one. I imagine it's shit. Movies that are made 11 years later, sequels tend to not be great. I'm thinking Anchorman 2. I'm thinking a lot of someone finding an old movie and going, this was popular. I wonder if there's a pre-made audience for it. But I don't know. I have not seen it. Maybe it's good.
Yeah, maybe they'll have to cover that down the road. It was a box office bomb, but that's all I know about it.
Damn it.
And yeah, 11 years later, I feel like we kind of hinted this at the beginning about the way that this movie has these threads. It felt like a movie that was ripe for a sequel in 2 years.
Yeah.
I think I would have enjoyed watching their dynamic expand 2 years later, but that isn't the future we got.
Yeah. Also, everyone being noticeably significantly older on the poster does kind of like, they're not worse actors for it, I imagine, but it does kind of have a like, oh, this is probably just cashing in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, for all of the granular criticisms we made, like I would affirm what I say at the beginning. I thought this was a great suggestion on your part for the themes of what we're going to be doing. And I thought this was a very fun movie. I'm glad I watched it finally. And I would still recommend it to anyone listening or watching.
Awesome. Me too.
So just two quick things to close us out.
Sure thing.
We talked about in our Don Cherry episodes how insular Canadian celebrity was, in that almost everyone you could connect through even a photograph to George Stroumboulopoulos, Canada's boyfriend. So what I thought would be fun, and is going to be very easy in this episode, is can we play 6 Degrees of George Stroumboulopoulos? We absolutely can, because I mean, we have Rick Mercer in this movie who I think they've both been on each other's shows. And I mean, if not, Rick Mercer has been on camera with Don Cherry, who's been on camera as Stroumboul. So
there you go.
There's one piece of trivia from the IMDb page that I didn't read.
All right.
I think this is not true, because we know who Tom Barry is supposed to be, right? It's a very obvious like rhyme of like Don Cherry, basically.
Wait, is this about to say that Tom Barry is based off someone else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you read this part? Okay.
I did not. I'm just guessing from the setup.
It says, I'll just read it. Rick Mercer's character, Tom Barry, may very well be named after an amateur stunt driver who was a protege of Ken the Mad Canadian Carter. I went to go look this up and I couldn't find anyone named Tom Barry. There was like a race car driver named Tom Barry Jr., but I was like, this is nonsense. We know who Tom Barry is named after, and it's not a stunt driver.
Maybe if that was like deep in the back of some writer's mind, some like lucky coincidence, but no, the character is Don Cherry.
But speaking of lucky coincidence, have you heard of Ken the Mad Canadian Carter?
I had not.
Ken the Mad Canadian Carter, a Montreal native, well known for being Canada's answer to Evel Knievel and attempting to jump the St. Lawrence River from Canada to the USA in a rocket-powered car.
Oh my God, I got to write this down.
Yeah, so my question for you was, can we talk about this on Failure to Launch? Because...
Oh, absolutely. We'd be glad to have you on.
I believe it was a rocket-powered Lincoln Continental.
Jesus.
So I really want to dive into this. I started opening his like Wikipedia last night. I was like, what the fuck? This is amazing. This dude like built rocket cars and shit and was a stuntman. And that's all I'll say for now. I really think we should get into it.
Sure thing.
Unrelated to this movie, but what a What a lucky coincidence. So,
And you only found it because IMDb fucked up.
yeah, it's like we were talking about before we recorded. All these things are just luck. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much for coming on and doing your contributions to this show as an equal co-host as everyone is. Do you want to plug the other show you do before we go?
I am one of the hosts, one of the equal co-hosts of the Failure to Launch podcast, where we talk about space failures, both fun, deadly, horrible. So if you are interested in any of that, or you are interested in a future episode about Ken Carter, the rocket rider, you can find us if you look for Failure to Launch. You might have to go past the 2000s rom-com to find us. If you see a blue logo, that's us. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, all of that stuff, as well as some YouTube videos.
Yeah, imagine picking a name for your show that is the exact same as a piece of popular media. It couldn't be me.
Yeah. and there's also like every podcast, every potential name, every combination of vowels and letters has already like several podcasts associated with it. Thankfully, none of the ones the other Failure to Launches seem active, and all of them are about startup failures. So we seem to have at least carved out a bit of a niche that place. I mean, it does make sense. I need to go back and check some of them. Some of them actually seem like interesting shows. So yeah, if you like our Failure to Launch, if you want to learn about space stuff, obviously listen to me first. But then if you also, I'll spread some love to the other Failures to Launch out there.
Yeah, we can all be failures together.
Yeah.
And speaking of failure, we don't have a set tagline to like end the show, so
Damn it.
that would be a good thing to have. But you know what? Je m'en calisse.
Porn Under Punches is a collaborative effort between me, Kelly Gomo, and a variety of contributors to create a variety of shows. If you want to support the project, you can do so by following us and our friends on our various socials. Check out the episode description for all the relevant links, especially this one, patreon.com/pornunderpunches. No E in punches. By supporting us on Patreon, you can enable this show to sustain itself and produce regular episodes. Join at the basic tier for expanded access to our Discord server, donate at an elevated level for monthly bonus content, or even fund us at the highest amount. And once a month I will draw anything you ask me to on an index card. And hey, if money's an object, word of mouth goes a long, long way.
Blue, what a pop. Oh, how she loves the Stanley Cup. Hockey man is what I am. Let's go. Listen to what I say. Play that game the Canadian way. Hockey man is what I am. Let's go.
Any sources used in the episode you just heard can also be found in the description. This content was primarily produced in Amiskwaciwâskahikan, the traditional territory of the Nahiwak, Nakota, Niitsitapi, Nakawe, Métis, and other nations, also known as Edmonton, Alberta, the Western Treaty 6 territory. Thanks for listening, and happy trails to you.